Theodore Roosevelt has a famous quote from a speech he gave in 1910 while he was on tour after his presidency. The full speech was titled Citizenship in a Republic, where he was sharing his beliefs on the importance of civic duty, moral character, and urging people to take action and contribute to society even if they face challenges along the way. Here's the quote. "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat." This speech of his has been used for a long time by speakers and authors such as Brene Brown, who are encouraging people to use their voice, to dare greatly, even if it is hard to do the right thing. This morning we are talking about what it means to resist injustice and oppression. Last week we looked at resisting evil, reminding ourselves that there are known evils in this world, but sometimes the biggest evil is the silence we choose to participate in when bad things are happening because it feels easier. But we know that God is calling us to resist that silence and stand with people in the margins, even when it's hard. And today we're looking at the part of our baptismal vows that say, resist injustice and oppression. These are words you probably hear me use a lot in preaching, but what does it mean in our baptismal vows? What does it mean to truly resist injustice and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves? Our baptismal vows, this resistance is a communal, lifelong commitment grounded in grace. Not a vague moral sentiment or a one-time promise, but a commitment to God who calls us to resist any system or act that denies dignity, worth, or access to God's abundant life through acts such as racism, sexism, exclusion, the list goes on. This type of injustice and oppression is the opposite of God. And it's the opposite of what God wants for all of God's people, and we are called to resist this today as well as they were in the ancient world. The story of Nehemiah is a great story. The prophet hears a cry in the city. The walls of Jerusalem, they were being rebuilt after the people had returned from exile. And on the outside, it looked like everyone was working really hard. They were doing this together to restore what had been broken. But Nehemiah started to listen to the people and quickly learned that behind the progress of the wall, there was a great deal of injustice and oppression. Families were struggling. Food was expensive. Taxes were high. People mortgaged their fields. Others had borrowed money. And the worst part, some of them, their own people, were charging interest in these deals and even accepting children into slavery as their payment. Nehemiah becomes furious, and he takes a great assembly to those in charge and calls out the injustice, demanding that they fix it. And when he calls out the Jewish leaders' sins in front of everyone, the wealthy and the powerful, those that were in charge, fall silent because they know Nehemiah is right. They know what they have done is not God's will, and they know they have to fix it. So they change the system, and they vow to fix what they had done. Justice would be restored because Nehemiah was not afraid to get into the mess of it all, into the arena, and demand change. Getting into the arena can feel hard. It can feel daunting to challenge those in charge, but it is necessary if we're ever going to make change like Nehemiah did. And this is not just a story of ancient history. This is how injustice still works. There is a lot of injustice and oppression in this world and our communities. And the worst part is that so often these injustices are coming from within our own communities. These injustices are being perpetuated by those who, just like us, hold a little bit of power and use it to maintain the status quo. And that is not okay. That is not the will of God, and it is not the gospel. The other day, Suzanne and I were working in the office, and a social worker called and was asking about our food pantry. And she said she had a client who is an undocumented immigrant and had some food insecurity and needed to go to a food pantry, but was afraid to go anywhere to ask for help. And of course, Suzanne assured her that the woman would be welcomed here and we would never ask for ID or proof of citizenship. And the worker said, I'll let her know, but in the meantime, can I come by and get food? Of course, of course. So she came, and after talking with the social worker, I knew this, but I had that realization once again that I will never know what that is like. I will never know what it's like to be unsure if I'm welcome in a place that is meant to help people, or if people who are helping will demand documentation that I take for granted. I will never know what it's like to be worried if I get pulled over, I will be taken and never see my children again. I will never know what it's like to be targeted for the color of my skin or the language I speak. And while I will never know what that is like, it doesn't mean I have an excuse to ignore it or to not help make change. Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king. He had wealth and status and could easily have fallen in line with those who were benefiting from the suffering of others. But he sees what is happening and calls the leaders out and demands answers and change. And we are called to do the same. I've said it before, there's not a lot we can do to change what is happening right in this moment to immigrants and those in the margins. But we can make a difference for how they feel when they come into this place or we encounter them in our lives. We have to pay attention to those who are afraid to speak out and help so that we are a people and a place that others do not fear. We have to ensure that places like ours and other places of faith do the same and do not make people afraid to walk through the doors. That people do not have to have others call on their behalf to see if they can get food, or if they should be feared being reported for not having documentation or ID. We can create a place where all of God's people flourish and do not feel less than or pushed aside like they do in so many parts of society. And the truth is, churches have been complicit in the injustice and oppression of people for centuries. People of faith have justified slavery by dehumanizing Africans. They've allowed for women to be pushed to the margins of leadership when Jesus placed them in it. People of faith have encouraged homophobia and segregation, and now anti-trans bills that do harm. And that is just a very small list of examples. The church should be a place of welcome, but the church is so often a place where those in power push others to the side so they can benefit off their pain. Jesus goes to the temple and sees that the tax collectors and money changers and those in charge, and he sees what they're doing, and he yells, and he calls them a den of robbers, denouncing what the leaders are doing and allowing in the place that is supposed to be a house of prayer. The temple was to be a place of worship, and they turned it into a market, and that infuriated Jesus. And he continues teaching the people like he had been doing from the beginning, and when he does, they listen. And those in charge began to look for a way to have him killed, because they are responsible for what happened in the temple, and Jesus was challenging them. And if Jesus had gone and turned this into a riot of the people, the Roman Empire would have held the leaders responsible, and they couldn't have that. So they began to plot, and we know that they eventually succeed. When those in places of power are challenged, it questions their authority, even if they seem to be on the good side. If they are not using their power for good, they are just as complicit in the suffering as those on the other side. Power gets to the best of us. And as people of faith, we have to change that. We have to run out the robbers and call out those harming others when we see it, so that all of God's people know the abundance of God. In Nehemiah's time, the wealthier people were exploiting the poor. Their shared identity did not prevent injustice. And today, injustice and oppression functions in similar ways, through systems that quietly advantage some while disadvantaging others. There are housing disparities, unequal schools and healthcare options, disproportionate incarceration and generational wealth gaps. Family will skip meals to pay the rent. There are food deserts in urban and rural communities, people struggling just to live where they work. And Nehemiah shows up and didn't say, this is just how the system works. He said, this is wrong. He understood that injustice within community weakens the entire community. And the people in Nehemiah were crying out. They were working so hard to rebuild the wall and suffering because of it. And people today are in the same situation. Families are working tirelessly, and the system in place are set up for them to fail and not succeed. Like Nehemiah, we have to confront those in power, sacrifice our own privilege, and refuse to allow those in charge to harm others. We have to choose moral authority over personal comfort. Imagine what that would look like. Seeing immigrants as contributors, not illegal. Trans people as human beings, equal and worthy. What if we were dismantling racist systems and ideologies and prioritizing food security and health care? Wouldn't that be amazing? Nehemiah was rebuilding a physical wall, and we are rebuilding a spiritual one, where we are resisting injustice and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. And we are doing this by being the people of God, for the people of God, by listening to the cries of the people, refusing to profit from the vulnerable's desperation, using power to restore and not extract, and reminding the church that it is a place of God's love and welcome and not a den for robbers. Resistance in the name of God is easy when you have others who are seeking it too. So lean in to that community of faith to resist with. Find people who are willing to get into the arena with you and resist, so that all can flourish and know that they are enough, they are worthy, and they are beloved.